If we're approaching it from a accusatory or shameful or judgmental perspective, it can cause damage to the relationship. But if we're approaching it from an honest perspective of, hey, I want to see honest growth in you. I want the benefit to be yours. And this is how it impacts me. That's a much better approach. And I've become much more receptive when you're sharing out of a desire to bring me benefit as well.
We're allowed also for preferences. So there are things I brought to you to say, this is not even a right and wrong or destructive a sin issue. It's just like, hey, I kind of would like if you could work on this. This is how it affects me.
In all of the good times and even the trials, through tears and through laughter, yeah, I know that I'll smile when I think of you. Smile for the things you do. Smile, God gave me you. You are the reason I smile. Yeah.
This is Behind Our Smiles.
Pursuing connection.
And finding joy.
Even in the struggle.
And welcome back to another episode of the Behind Our Smiles Marriage Podcast. We hope you had a wonderful Christmas and a great start to the new year. We are Joe and Tara. We're so grateful to be hanging out with you.
And if your husband or wife has made you smile lately, we would love to hear about it.
Yeah, in fact, all you have to do is email us, Tara, T-A-R-A, at behindoursmiles.com. And it really is one of my favorite things, just hearing what makes people smile about their husband or wife.
And if you need some ideas, we like to share your comments on the podcast each week. And this week, the first of the year, we are hearing from Tara. And she's, another Tara. Here we go. Not my Tara, a different Tara, sharing about her husband, Mark. She says, Mark is a wonderful man who loves the Lord. He has a great sense of humor and is always able to make me smile. Life is not easy. Paul states that when trials come, and they do, I praise the Lord for my husband. He is always willing to help others and works on his walk daily. I am very thankful for a man that is growing in Christ with me daily. Thank you so much, Tara.
Sounds like a great story, especially in what we're going to talk about today. This idea of, hey, I can work on that.
And when trials come and things get hard, there's that opportunity we have for growth. And that I really like what she shares about this daily growing in Christ. It doesn't have to be a yearly necessarily, especially at the beginning of a year. We start thinking about New Year's goals and what do I want to do for the year. And it's easy to get caught up in big, large projects versus just a daily walk.
Well, years ago, I used to I would have a list like 3 or 4 pages long, right? And day 2 or 3, the list is gone because there's no way I could keep up with all that. And I think later on, I learned that I think I'd heard this advice somewhere and it was great. Just pick 1 or 2 things, work on those things. If you get them, then you can always add more to the list later. But that way it can stay kind of focused.
Another problem is I find it easier to be focused on the things my husband needs to work on rather than the things that I need to work on.
Yeah, it's a whole lot easier to recognize the problem in others. In fact, the Bible talks about that, right? And get the log out of our own eye. But I think looking at the speck in your eye helps me get the focus off of my problems. And then I think sometimes I can buy into this lie that if I can get you to fix your problems, that will fix my problems.
Right. The goals are always out there instead of in us.
When really I need to be working on me. And if I can fix my problems, in other words, if I can grow in my relationship with God, then that grows our relationship together.
Well, it reminds me of the idea that I've heard about marriage, and as we've been sharing with our kids who are embarking that part of their lives, that the scary part of marriage is the idea that it is a very large, full-length mirror, almost like one of those HD jumbotrons that you see in the big theaters, where it's like you can see every mistake and flaw in your skin. And it's hard to lean into that, to go, this person's going to see you and know you, warts and all, and every little hair coming out of your nose, they notice it. And it's hard to deal with once you are face-to-face with that.
Yeah, and so our weaknesses become glaring. And again, I think that goes back to what you were just saying, that I can see your weaknesses so clear that it becomes easy for me to say, hey, let me help you fix that. Let me help you with that.
Well, it's like in the morning when I don't have my contacts in, I just can't see well enough to see if I've made a mistake, which I do.
Well, we all do. But how do you feel when I, as your husband, expose that weakness?
Well, I'm defensive at first because I don't want you to point out that I might have made a mistake because I don't like feeling like I've made a mistake. And I'd rather just say that it's your vision that's wrong, or your thought process is wrong for pointing out a mistake.
Yeah, that's me too. And I think it's so funny because it is pride, but I don't think any of us like being corrected necessarily. And I think it's easy to believe that it is the other person who has the vision problem when we are being corrected.
And in those moments, we can go either way. We can lean into the defensiveness and lean into it's the other person's fault. Or in our marriage, the phrase I think that has helped us work through those moments of going, and there's a little bit of rumbling in your tummy to go, I think they pointed something out in me. And I think also that I know it's true. There's those times like that maybe the person's seeing something wrong. I will grant you that. But sometimes like in my heart, I'm like, it's true. I can see the mirror as well. And instead learning just to say, I can work on that. And there's times, Joe, that you've said that to me when I've been able to point out something to you like, hey, this is kind of how this is going. This is maybe what you're doing. This is how it affects me. I don't like it, or it hurts me, or I don't know. And the times that you've accepted that correction humbly and just said, honey, I can work on that, was like the most beautiful response in that moment that provided a level of healing and peace in our marriage with that simple response. And learning to say that more and more, I think has helped us quite a bit.
I think it also is very dependent. I wish it wasn't, but dependent on the response of the person that's calling out the weakness as well, right?
Because I'm laughing because I don't think I've always done that well with you.
Well, I think if we're approaching it from a accusatory or shameful or judgmental perspective, it can cause damage to the relationship. But if we're approaching it from an honest perspective of, hey, I want to see honest growth in you. I want the benefit to be yours, and this is how it impacts me. Then I think that's a much better approach. And I have found that I'm a lot more receptive. I wish I was receptive anyway. I wish I was just great at that. But
you're great a lot.
I've become much more receptive when you're sharing out of a desire to bring me benefit as well.
And we're allowed also for preferences. So there are things I brought to you to say, this is not even a right and wrong. We're not talking about like a sin issue where it's like a flat out. It's just like, hey, I kind of would like if you can work on this. This is how it affects me. So even, I guess we can share a little bit example from us that one thing that kind of bothered me was your little bit of time management. But when you left for work or leaving from anywhere, you'd say, like, I'm leaving. And you didn't really mean I was leaving. You meant
when I was like leaving to head home. And your I'm leaving meant I'm in the process of leaving. Right. So in my mind, I'm always excited to see you and have you come home. I start counting down. Maybe I've been preparing a meal or preparing for your arrival. And you're not home in the allotted time. So I'm like, well, if he left now, he should be home now. Why is he not home yet? And that kind of it bothered me. It felt, and I had to be able to say, honey, I get really excited. What did it feel like?
It felt like I was not as important to your day. And it felt like, or I was just annoyed that you didn't understand what I'm leaving meant.
Right.
Like, are you leaving? And just to be able to say to you, can you work on that? Can you don't tell me you're leaving unless you're actually leaving. Cause then my day gets thrown off.
Right. And when you shared that with me, and it was more like, it wasn't like, hey, you're doing this wrong from an accusatory tone, even though I was, if I told you I'm in the process of leaving, I didn't use the word process. So it looked like, hey, he's leaving. And I grossly underestimated whatever needed to be done, or an emergency came up or whatever. And I didn't text you to let you know. But one of the adjustments when you shared that with me, and this is how it impacts me, and I saw that you were excited to see me and then I wasn't there. And I relate to that from some things that have happened in my childhood. So I was like, hey, I got to make an adjustment here. And so one of the adjustments we made is that I don't text you until I'm in the car and it's rolling.
I would rather wait an extra half an hour and you actually text when you're in the car than
No, I do send you text
minutes.
Along the way if I'm going to be late.
Oh, yeah.
I'm like,
I
hey,
have
I'm
an
working
idea.
on this. I think another few minutes, I'll text you when I'm in the car. And then I always text you when I'm rolling so you know you have the 8-minute warning or whatever you want at that point. And I think if we're talking about time, another area that was really good for you to share with me, and I think I began to understand it, and then I talked to you about it, was hoping it wasn't a problem. And
Can
then
you work on this, babe?
realized it was a problem. And that was my I don't know if this is a guy thing, a person thing, or just a married person. I don't know what this is, but there's always more to do. There's always more that I'm thinking about that has to get done. And so my to-do list seemingly is always growing. And then there's always the fun stuff in there too that you want to get to. I want to go do this.
To enjoy.
Enjoy this. And so there were a lot of times where we were spending time together and I was hurrying it along. I wasn't really giving you the moment. I wasn't in the moment or really listening to you or hearing you all the way through. I was just trying to hurry it along because I had 12 other things that I wanted to get to. And so my heart wasn't in that moment. It was like down the road a little bit. Does it make sense? And so when
I sense that.
You did know that.
And I'm like, I feel like I'm on a timer and I've got 3.5 minutes with you, and
which puts a lot of pressure on you. And I didn't realize I was doing that, but I think in my own prayer time and in asking God to make me a better husband, he began to reveal those things to me. And so I went to you and I just asked you, hoping you'd say, "Oh, honey, no problem. You don't have a problem in this area. You're great. It's awesome." But you said, "You know what? I do feel like I'm on a timer. I do feel like I've got to have all of my ducks in a row, and I've got to have my words." And
are you done yet?
Yes. Well, I think I noticed some indicator lines are, don't hurry away, or if you got just a minute, or, you started to preface the things that you were saying. And I started to notice that, and I was like, wait a minute, there's got to be. So I asked you about it, and you said, yeah, I think this is a problem. And at that point, you were very humble and very kind and loving in your approach. And it really was, yes, it was going to benefit you, but you also knew that I needed that benefit as well. And so that caused me, and it really benefited our marriage. It benefited our kids. It benefited my relationship with our kids, my friends, just to say, maybe I need less things in my life, but to give those things a little more time and to make those things the right things. And
those are sometimes goals that you might have had at the beginning of the year, but really those are sometimes things that just show up when they show up. That the moment that someone says, "Hey, I'm maybe not rising to where I want to be in this area," and you could have said to me, "No, honey, I give you so much time," or "No, honey, I don't do that," or "Too bad, this is how I am." Instead it was like, and it wasn't even necessarily having to do with things exactly as I said, like this is the new rules according to Tara, but it's like, okay, this is an area that Tara wants me to work on. And I think in the times you said, just, I'll work on that. I can work on that. Then I'm like, okay, you recognize it and I'm willing to come your way.
And it wasn't like it was an overnight fix, like things didn't get all perfect overnight, but it was, I think that you saw that commitment in me to say, yeah, I see that this is a problem. I'm not exactly sure how to fix it totally, but I'm going to work on it.
And those small steps made a big difference. And I did see it wasn't just empty words. Obviously, just saying I'll work on it and not working on it is not very helpful. But I feel like there were times that you did make those small adjustments. And I'm like, oh, he's working on it. He recognizes that. And that did my heart really good. And I feel safer coming to you to say, can we work on this together?
And I think the nice thing is that the flip side of that coin worked as well, in the sense that as I responded, or vice versa, responded gracefully, then I was able to say to you, hey, there's an area that I really would like. I
think you led the way very well with this, Joe, because I do not like when you tell me what I need to work on. I don't like it. I still don't like it. Ask me later and I won't like it, but I recognize that's a weakness of mine. I don't like accepting your correction. So yes, there are many areas probably for decades that I was like, eh. And then finally, when you started saying, I can work on it, I started saying, well, maybe then there's stuff that I can work on too. Even, especially those areas where like, okay, my husband likes this. He prefers this. This is what he sees in me. And so I will accept it. And it's hard, but my list is very, very long, but you can think of an area that I've had to things I need to work on personally. I'll give an example then.
Okay, go ahead.
That's
like, okay, for instance, that's like a no-win. That's like a no-win. It's like when you're asked a question like this. Does this dress look good? Or whatever it is. It's like,
how much have I improved?
There's no way that I can answer that question correctly.
How much have I improved? Yes. No, even in the process of like podcasting together, the times that you've had to say, honey, I don't think you did it right? Or you can do this better, or you can say it better. And I'm like, I think I said it just fine. And saying, hon, let's work on how we do this. Let's work on this. And even though I really want to say, but I like my way better, to go, honey, I'll work on that. If it's important to you, then I'll work on it. And I don't necessarily make the growth at the rate I want to make it at, but I can at least stop and say, I'll work on it. So there's a lot of different areas that I think, I wouldn't say you pick on me about, that's not fair, but a lot of areas that because you're good at something, I recognize that I'm not good at it. Does that make sense?
That's a good point, because there are areas in my life that you're good at and I'm not. And as I have learned over the years to say, Tara does know more about this, so maybe I should yield to that. It has actually made my life easier.
And then there are things you're good at that I'm not good at. So then I recognize that weakness in myself. And then there's things that you just care about more than I care about. So I've learned to say to you, honey, you just care more about that. So like our home safety has come up again and again, and the doors being locked and certain things that like, I don't care enough about this. I'm recognizing that. But you say, hon, sometimes you forget to do this. And again, in the beginning, it's like, no, I do it just fine. You know what I mean? Or I don't care about it, or forget it. Versus just going, okay, if this is important to you, Joe, I will work on it. And I make a small adjustment. And I even recognize this is going to be difficult for me. This is not my natural way of living. This is not my natural way of doing it. But if it's important to you, I will do it. And I'll work on that. Again, my progress is slow sometimes. And even just, honey, would you make sure this is closed? Would you make sure all that stuff? I'm like, but again, I recognize that it's important to you. And I say, or I'm learning to say, I can work on that. I will, for your sake, if it makes you happy.
I appreciate that.
We'll see. I don't know.
No, you're doing great in those areas. And again, the more that we grow together and the more that we've had success in this area of being kind and graceful, then the more that we can speak up about things and not hold things. And it actually grows us. It actually grows the relationship. So it's good.
Yeah, there's a lot. Again, I could keep going, just the areas that I think, again, you have been really gracious in sharing with me, even if we're just talking and we're just having a nice cup of coffee, whatever. You're like, hey, babe, sometimes you talk over me a bit, or you don't let me finish my sentence, or you don't let me do this, And again, my first reaction is, no, I don't, And then going, okay, he's being kind, and he's asking for kindness back, and okay, honey, I'll work on that. And then I think about it, and like 3 years later, I'm like, I'm working on it, honey. I haven't seen any progress, but I promise you I'm working on it. I'm not that, if that encourages you at all.
Oh, it's really encouraging. And I think sometimes we can't see our own growth, but others around us can see that growth. And so I really do appreciate the way that Tara works on that. And I
look
think
at that. We're working on it.
Yes.
We're working on the work.
We're working on working on it.
Working on the work. And I think the other thing that has kept us from accepting those weaknesses and saying, I can work on that, is that black and white thinking. If I accept that I have a weakness, it means I'm a complete failure. Or if I can't achieve perfection in this area, if I can't get the door locked every single time, if I can't do this every single time, then what's the point of working on it? And I think to be able to say, perfection isn't the goal, and failure is not your identity. It's just the gentle working on it. And I think that for me motivates me to keep working on it.
Yeah, I think sometimes... And I've been really guilty of this at times, is I can almost require Tara to be perfect. I can almost say, you're not good enough in this area, and I can make it very personal instead of separating it from Tara as a person. And I've totally made that mistake, and I've gone pretty far down that road without realizing it. And the response, honestly, I mean, Tara, you've been very humble at times in your response when I think back, but there have been other times where I have probably justifiably so gotten the response I wasn't expecting.
We'll be way less open to that correction or that request to work on it if it's like, I got to be perfect. And most of us, I mean, I might talk to you and as if I want perfection, but really, I think we both are looking for growth. And saying, hey, I just want to work on these things. And when growth happens, it's beautiful. But to look at our weaknesses and go, weaknesses in themselves are not the enemy. They are the catalyst, for growth.
Well, I think that's one of the adjustments that we've been able to make for the most part. And again, it still shows up where, there are times when I'm not, I don't do this very well, but I think when we can focus on who it is we're becoming instead of what we're disappointed in who we are, then I think that makes a big difference. Because when I know that you, Tara, want me to grow, then that gets me excited about growth.
And that goes back to the identity piece of who we are and making our weaknesses our identity. Like, okay, because I am not good at this and because I fail in this area, that's who I am. But it goes back to 2 Corinthians, the day, okay, what does our weaknesses do for us? The weaknesses point us to Christ. That our weaknesses, we don't have to sit in a ball of shame because of our weaknesses and be like, well, forget it. Instead, we're like, wait, no, his grace is sufficient for us in weaknesses. That's when God's strength in our lives shows up and becomes our identity, not our failures.
And I think that verse even says that his power is made perfect in our weakness. So he does that work that's really extraordinary, but we have to be humble and willing for God to do that work.
And I think the times I've been able to accept the weakness to go, okay, Joe, you called me out in something. I see it. I'm not going to take those weaknesses as my identity. I'm not going to sit there and just grieve, but to say, okay, this is my chance to lean on Christ. This is my chance to my pride that says I'm getting it right all the time. My pride that says I saw it right, I did it right, to go, wait a minute, I don't have that. I'm not perfect. I need Christ every day. My husband can show it to me, but I can rejoice in that and say, again, I have to work on it now. It's the ball's in my court in terms of saying, okay, God, help me with this weakness. Help me rely on you to do better.
And I think that's a key, at least for me. If I say to you, Tara, I'm going to work on this, if I don't involve God, I'm not going to be successful in that. I just know. I know that if I try on my own strength and my own weakness, I'm going to fail, and then I'm going to feel like a failure, and then that's going to hurt my ability to really work on it. I'm going to just give up. It's like if I were to do a diet and it's not working, eventually I'm like, this isn't worth it. I'm going to do what I want to do. So I think involving God, so I think that's a great point that Tara, you bring up, is that involving God in it is really the only way to assure success.
It's like we can work on that.
Yeah, almost right. Yes.
God and I are going to work on that. He's going to do most of the work.
But I'm
going to tag along.
Yes. And maybe our marriage is the only one, but that's never been. I mean, we live our lives in a posture that, of course, God is a part of. But I don't think I've ever said to you, Tara, we're going to work on that. You're like, who's we?
He's going to work on it. He's going to work on me.
Yeah.
He's going to figure out the mess in here, and then hopefully I can have a life worthy of that. The work that he does in our lives.
I think the
idea.
The other problem when we are approaching, because if you're anything like me, there's a lot of weakness, right? There's a lot of things that I need to be working on. And sometimes I think we can really beat ourselves up, right? We can look in the mirror and all of our focus can be on the things that we're not getting right.
And it's not helpful then if your spouse is commenting on that and sees it. Right.
And so, and then what can end up happening is you can start to think it's never enough. I can never get there. I'll never accomplish that. So I think it is important to also celebrate those things that you are doing better, right? When Tara, you're amazing in this way. When you see growth in me, you celebrate that. You're like, wow, I'm really seeing that growth happen. And one of the things that we pray for others all the time is that bird's eye view. And when you get that bird's eye view, especially from your spouse, it can make a huge difference to say, hey, you are gaining ground. You are getting better.
Well, and there's a fine line in marriage that we have this huge role to influence each other and to be the first to see a weakness and be the first to maybe address something that's happening in their heart. But there's a fine line between iron sharpening iron, and we're going to be working on each other, and then saying, I am the Holy Spirit in my husband's life. Like, I'm going to consistently point out every time he fails. And I feel like that's also a recipe for disaster too. And there's that trust factor. You know what I mean? If I'm like,
that could be a full-time job.
Because like you mentioned, if you got a weakness list that long, and I got one last long, I could have a full-time job saying, okay, let me be your manager of all those personal flaws. So I think from my point of view as let's say a giver of correction in that situation, to take that seriously with that grace and humility and not of a joyful thing of I found one more area that my spouse did it wrong. Can't wait to come home and tell him. If that's my heartbeat, that's not going to be received to you. But I think as I've learned to say, what areas do I actually need to bring up anyway? Because sometimes I go, wait a minute, maybe it's a weakness, but it's not my call or my place to call this out in him. It might be someone else in his life. So there's that delicate line between sharpening and just it's too much.
Right. Or maybe he's already working on 3 things. Or I think about that a lot too with Tara, is like maybe she's already working on these things. Is this really important to bring up right now? Right. I think that's when you can start to feel overwhelmed and start to feel like it's never enough. It's like, it's back to that New Year's resolutions list when I used to have 3 or 4, multiple pages, and you just eventually give up. You need 1 or 2 things to work on. So I think Tara, we have made that adjustment. For the most part, we've done that.
A little. Yeah. I think I've done better, or at least I hope I've worked on that.
No, you're making a huge difference in that.
How much I help you work on things. But for me, really adding an abundant amount of grace. So, and Joe, you've grown so much in the 20, 30 years you've been married. And I had, it's been 20, 30 years. And I think sometimes I wanted that 20, 30 years in 2 weeks, the things you're working on. But to recognize, hey, if there is an area he's working on patience, he's working on tenderness, he's working on time, whatever it is, to go, he's only a human. He can only grow at a rate that he can grow. It's like a crash diet. It's not good to lose 100 pounds in a week. It's like gradual, slow and steady is the way of growth. And to encourage you in that growth and not be like, oh, and one more thing, and oh, one more thing. And I'm like, no, I don't want my husband to be discouraged. I don't want him to be defeated. I don't want him to feel like it is never enough. Like, you know what? You've been growing consistently. I'm happy with the growth. I'm encouraged for that, but not to be laying such a burden on you that you feel like it's never enough. That's a big one, I think, for me, because you do respond. Sometimes you respond well, and sometimes you do grow, but there's a balance to that.
Yeah. I think also if you're working on patience, shouldn't that take time? Right? Take some time. But I think back to that bird's eye view, I do think that's such an important thing for us as spouses to help point out to our husband or our wife to say, hey, I see a lot of growth here. I see the ground that you're gaining. I see that you are working on that, and I really appreciate that. And the times that Tara has been that way with me and has been able to share that with me, especially anything tangible, it has made a huge difference, and it makes me want to work harder. And then it actually has this interesting effect that I never would have thought possible, because my pride says the opposite, but I'll be like, hey, is there anything else I can work on?
No, we become more open to like, hey, if I got to work on it, I got to work on it. Like, it doesn't feel like a personal attack.
Because I think you also start to feel like, all right, I can get there. I can be the husband that God wants me to be. I can be the friend or the father or whatever it is that I'm working toward. And I think that I think that's huge.
Well, it reminds me in 1 Thessalonians, there's that word admonish, which what the word admonish means might be interesting to study, this idea of the correction and but it goes along with several things. And we urge you, brothers, admonish the idle. Like, okay, you're failing, you're not hitting the mark somehow. Encourage the faint-hearted, help the weak, be patient with them all. So I think that reminds me, like the correcting part is part of the package of encouragement. It's part of the package of helping, and in the end, it's about patience. So it's not like admonish them and then punish them if they don't get their act together in time. It's like admonish, encourage, help, and be patient in that process. Because I can only work on things as fast as I can work on them, and as much as any human can go. There's only so much you can do in a day, in a week. But again, in the long-term scheme of things, you look back and go, okay, that faithfulness in doing the things you know you're supposed to do makes a difference in the end. Yeah. And it's something I'm working on right now.
And I think Tara's doing a great job working on that.
There's a lot of work to work on.
So there may be some things that you're working on, or maybe some things that Tara and I talked about today have stimulated some thought process in you. We'd love to hear from you if you want to share. If you're looking for encouragement, or you're looking for someone just to pray with you, or you just want to share your story, we'd love to hear it. You can drop us a line anytime. Our email address is Tara, Tara, at behindoursmiles.com. And when you email us, be sure to share with us what makes you smile about your husband or wife.
I'll work on that.
Hope you have a great and wonderful year, a great week, and we'll see you again next week.